So the research area of interest is really curious. When we're talking about writing the story, we're talking very much about the background rationale for a project. The research area of interest is weird because it's kind of halfway there. Um, it's likely that during your pre-doctoral fellowship or your pre-application support fund, you'll be doing quite a lot of groundwork, which will perhaps inform the background and rationale or reinforce the background and rationale. And yet you have this curious beast, the research area of interest that you have to provide, perhaps with not all the information that you ideally want if you were trying to explain what it is that you're interested in. So it's pitching that right. And to be honest, this is quite a new thing with the fellowship schemes. And so, we're kind of getting used to it as well. Um, Interestingly, if you go to the guidance, it grandly tells you to download their template, and their template looks like this. It's basically a blank page. So there's quite limited information about what should be in your research area of interest. And obviously, you get this for the pre-application support fund, you get it for the pre-doctoral fellowship, you get it for the, I think you get it for the LA Spark, well, possibly, I'm not sure, I can't remember, but definitely for the first two. So it's a single side of page, A4 page. They want it PDF'd. This is their template, as I say, a blank page. They want 12-point Arial. And they say, we need to understand the area or discipline in which you wish to develop your research career. This will enable reviewers to assess your career development program and the proposed supervision or mentorship. So, noticeably, they're not actually assessing your research area of interest as to whether it's appropriate or not. But I'm sure there's a little bit of that going on. So they don't explicitly say, if it's a really silly idea, we're not going to fund it. But I'm sure there will be an element of that. So I think it's a kind of strange balance that you have to know enough, but you don't have to know everything that might go into a background section for a future project-based research grant application. So again, I'm talking about tools. What is the story that you're trying to tell, and what tools do you have to hand to enable you to write it? Well, firstly, at this stage in particular, your experiences, whether it's clinical or your experiences working in a local authority or in social care, what have you observed? It may be an idea that's come out of practice. And of course, many brilliant ideas come out of practice and seeing every day what perhaps doesn't work right. So that's important as far as your research area of interest is concerned. PPI, so this is where PPI is so tremendously important at these early stages. They can tell you how they feel about the thing that you've observed. Is it valid? Do they share your concerns about it? What are their experiences? So they can inform your story as to why it's important and why this piece of work is one of interest to you. Obviously, there's literature. There may be pre-existing systematic reviews or other reviews. There may be primary research papers and other literature, grey literature, other sources of data that maybe you can use. But at this stage, at this early stage, you're not necessarily totally on top of that. You may have an idea. I think for a research area of interest, I think it probably helps if you've had a look at the literature in some form, even if it's a kind of quick scoping review, making sure that you've got all the major papers and you've had some look at them. Because I think if you can say, this is my area of interest, and you know what, it is broadly supported in what I can see, part of my pre-doctoral fellowship, I'm going to undertake a systematic review to make sure I'm totally on top of the literature. But as far as I can tell, there are a number of important studies that support what I'm saying at this stage. So again, it's that balance. They were not going to expect you to have done necessarily a systematic review at this stage, but they will want to know that it seems to be a good area and it is supported, broadly speaking, by the literature. Again, there may be pilot and feasibility work that you know about, but it may be that during the pre-doctoral fellowship, you may be undertaking some pilot or feasibility work. It might just be feasibility work looking at a data set that you want to use. You want to see what variables are there, whether they're really recorded reliably, etc. So you may or may not have that kind of work. So the stuff in the circle, you may have an idea about, but you won't have the kind of detail that perhaps you would have in a background rationale section for a full fellowship. But you perhaps would have an idea of some of these things, and it would be helpful to evidence that your research gap at this stage in some form. Your other tools are obviously the presentation, the style, the language, the argument, and the coherence of the way you write. So these are all the tools that you have for your research area of interest. So what's the argument? We talked a little bit about this because we had a session on what makes a good project in the first session, and as homework, I think we gave you this kind of template to work with. Have a first stab at your research area of interest. This is typically what you see in a background or rationale section in a full-blown research plan based a project application. Something is a problem and you give evidence for it, prevalence, incidence, or poor patient outcomes, or cost, maybe other things, patient experience. Its resolution would improve many things. So, we want to see a reduction in all these bad things and an improvement. Previous work has shown this, that, and the other, but it's deficient in the following ways. So that's our knowledge gap. This project will address this knowledge gap. So it will resolve the uncertainty. It'll provide the necessary information or a solution to the problem. And when this project is done, the problem will be resolved and the impact of this will be, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is a format that you'll see in most background rationale sections of, for example, a fellowship application or an RFPB application where there's a research plan and you're setting up the research plan here. So it's a very typical story. Just to demonstrate that it really holds for whatever you're looking at, I'm going to give a silly example. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, a study to evaluate the impact of Jedi Force staff training on the mortality and morbidity associated with the dark side. And in true academic style, I'll give you the daft acronym, IGEST. So the dark side is a problem. It causes death in large numbers of people every year and has been known to exterminate whole planetary populations. In addition, it causes much anxiety and depression. The costs are enormous, both for victims, but also in rebuilding lives and civilizations affected. Removal of the dark side would be beneficial to many millions of people. It would reduce suffering and death and reduce costs to the NHS and other health and social welfare organizations. Current approaches to remove the dark side, such as attacks by small numbers of disorganized rebels, have failed. There is a clear need for a more radical and magical solution. Preliminary studies indicate the potential of force training for Jedi Knights in tackling the dark side, but its full efficacy or effectiveness is unknown. This project will evaluate whether or not force training of Jedi Knights is effective in fighting the dark side. If this approach is found to be beneficial, the dark side may be successfully defeated, with resulting improvements in quality of life and longevity throughout the galaxy. That is, of course, until another Jedi Knight goes AWOL, because they really are tremendously unreliable. So seriously, if we look at a couple of projects, this is a typical feasibility study for a trial, which you might see for research patient benefit. It's a long time ago in a time far, far away, RFPB in 2010, so it's a long time ago. But again, the story is there. So obesity has led to more type 2 diabetes. It causes morbidity and premature mortality. It costs the NHS a great deal. So basically they're saying obesity is a problem in this group. Reduction in obesity in those with obesity and type 2 diabetes would reduce complications, even resolve diabetes. Its resolution would improve many things. Current guidance for those with non-morbid obesity and type 2 diabetes suggests various things, but these have limited effects. Preliminary studies show the potential of bariatric surgery, but results need confirming in a trial. But actually, we don't know whether a trial will work. We don't know whether a trial is feasible. So it's saying here, previous work has shown we need better interventions. Bariatric surgery is a possibility and we need a trial, but we don't know whether a trial is feasible. A feasibility study will enable us to see if bariatric surgery is logistically possible and acceptable to this group of patients and their clinicians. So this project will show whether or not a trial is feasible. If this is successful and a definitive study shows it works, bariatric surgery could provide a cost-effective solution for this group. If a trial is possible and is undertaken and bariatric surgery works, we will have a solution. So it's quite contorted here in a way, because it's quite a long way from patient benefit, but it's still the same structure in terms of the story. And similarly, if we're not talking about an intervention, this is more of a finding out type study. Currently, the inpatient care on offer for children and young people with severe mental health problems is variable and unsatisfactory. So we're saying unsatisfactory care for children and young people with severe mental illnesses is a problem. Improvements of care would lead to better patient outcomes, etc. So the resolution to this problem would mean better care and better use of resources. Currently, we don't know how patients fare, whether different settings affect patients' progress, and the cost implication of these different settings. So there's little prior work on how different settings affect the outcomes and costs for this group. This project will provide information on this. So the project will give us this information. This information will be vital to those responsible for ensuring that young people have access to high quality inpatient care when needed. It will also help staff in local services make better use of beds. So this study will provide much needed information to plan better services. So the same structure, different type of study, but same structure, same story. So how can we sort of adapt what would traditionally be, I guess, the background rationale section to a project that's coming up in the grant application to a one-pager? I think one way to do it is probably if we look at its resolution, which is nice. It's nice to have that statement in a background rationale. It sort of kicks off and prepares for the it kicks off and prepares for the aims and objectives which follow. But actually, it should resonate with the last one here, which is what happens when the project is resolved. So one could probably get rid of that, and what you probably want to replace it with is your current ideas on how I might do this. So we're not giving a detailed list of exactly what we're doing, because actually we don't know at this stage. This is a pre-doctoral fellowship, it's a pre-application support fund. We're not 100% sure what we're going to do, but we need to jot down perhaps what our initial thinking is, our current ideas, and that will enable reviewers to see, oh yeah, the training and development plan is going to get them prepared to do work like that in the future. So again, we're talking about the problem, we're given evidence for it, prevalence, incident, poor patient outcomes. Other things to look for are policies or funding calls which are calling for work in the area, like priority setting exercises like the James Lind Alliance, your clinical experience, and PPI work. So what have people been telling you, basically, to support this as a problem? Previous work has shown. If you can do an initial look at least at what's out there to check that it sort of justifies that there is a gap that needs addressing here, I think reviewers will find that comforting. You may get away with not having it, but I think then you may come across a reviewer who says, well, how do we know this is important? Or actually, I don't think this is important. In which case, it would be very helpful to have some indication that there's formal literature somewhere that supports your idea and evidence gap. The project I'm planning will address this knowledge gap, so it's going to resolve the uncertainty, provide the necessary information or the solution. My current ideas on how I might do this are, and you can just list, I'm going to do a survey, I'm going to do some scoping work with local authorities, I'm going to do a systematic review, I'm going to form a stakeholder group, and we're going to have a series of meetings, etc. The impact of this work will be, well, in the long term, it's going to be to reduce the prevalence incidence, reduce patient user public health outcomes, or reduce costs. But at this stage, it might be, the impact of this program of work will be to prepare me to undertake a fellowship application, which will have these sorts of methodologies in them. So it's, again, thinking sort of short and long term in terms of what the impact work will be, the short term being how it prepares you for the next stage, the longer term being how it's going to provide a solution for the NHS or for public health or social care, etc. So just an example, so I'm taking the example from the DRF that I quoted in the presentation that I've just given you. So patient deterioration in hospital is a problem. A recent review estimated that 12,000 deaths could have been prevented in English hospitals in 2009, whilst other sources estimate this number could reach 40,000 per year. Previous work has shown that early warning scores used to detect deterioration are deficient. They are rarely data-driven, and few have been developed using robust statistical methods. Scores do not include patient factors such as age and disease type or severity, and yet they're intended to be used across all types of patients, meaning that the predicted risks are unlikely to be accurate for all patients. Because current early warning scores only take into account the most recent set of patient readings and ignore the previous ones, they will not notice a patient who's getting sicker as soon as they could do. So it's laying out what previous work has shown. So here you might talk about the initial literature that you've looked at. You may talk about your PPI work and what the PPI have said, your observations of clinical practice, and your practice in the local authority as a potential existing problem, or lack of information that needs to be addressed so we can move on and do things better. My research will provide a solution to this problem. At this point, again, this could be quite vague, but it would be good to have some idea of what you might want to do. After all, you're using the pre-doctoral fellowship to do some training to prepare you. Hence, in the last session, we talked about design considerations for your future project, because it will highlight to you the groundwork that you need to do in your pre-doctoral application or your pre-application support fund. It will highlight to you the training that you need to do to make sure that you will be equipped to undertake that fellowship at a later stage. So here, you could say quite briefly, I'm going to use statistical regression models that are robust and unbiased and will more accurately link vital signs to patient outcomes. So you have some sort of statement about how you think you're going to approach the subject. The output of this research, obviously, ultimately, will be a more accurate and useful early warning score. Such a score, once deployed in the NHS, could prevent patients deteriorating, saving lives. It would also prevent costly implications and ICU admissions, saving the NHS money. So that's in the long term. In the short term, it's going to prepare me to undertake the work that I want to do in the fellowship to make sure that I can do it properly. So there's worksheet, and I just thought it would be worth spending 5 minutes now just to get you going, especially if you hadn't had a go at it after the first session. So have a look at those bullet points, jot down on a page of A4, this is for your own benefit really, about your own research area of interest. Even if they're just initial thoughts at this stage, it might highlight to you a little bit of work that you need to do to make sure you've got a bit of extra information in place to do it. So just spend 5 minutes having a look at your own research area of interest and see if you can populate some of those bullet points with one or two things. Just getting back to the kind of aspects of constructing this story that I've been talking about. People use things like convincing and defensive arguments. So the sorts of assert, justify statements that we were talking about earlier are convincing arguments. They're the ones that you want the reviewer to remember. Sometimes we like also to use defensive arguments. So it kind of deals with a problem or perhaps a shortcoming or, as I was saying, no research project plan is perfect. It kind of deals with those problems and gets them out of the way so a reviewer can forget them. So for example, if we're doing a study that's only collecting data from a limited area or from a couple of areas, a reviewer might think, oh, that's not generalizable or that's not representative. But if you then go to ONS and show that the socio-demographic profile is very similar to national averages, therefore results from the study should be generalizable, then it kind of makes the reviewer not worry about it anymore. So we want to sort of distinguish between these convincing arguments that you want reviewers to remember and sort of defensive arguments that are necessary, because if you don't put that in there, a reviewer will have it as a niggle that will stay in their mind. And then when it comes to the panel decision, they'll say, but I'm still not sure because they didn't answer that question. I don't know whether they realized that was a problem with the study design. So that's why we must not shove things under the carpet. We must be upfront with any shortcomings or sort of mitigations in place to sort out any issues that there might be with the research that we're planning or what we're doing more generally. As I've said previously, make good use of connectives, and here's an example of all the different sort of connectives you can use. I'm sure there are many more, but they are tremendously helpful in creating that sense of argument, consistency, and a sort of pitch, if you like, so that by the end of it, people are very keen on supporting your project. And again, the earlier example of the plain English summary that was put together by Steve, using however, in addition, yet, finally, and importantly. And overall, with your research area of interest, you are trying to sort of pack a punch with it. You do want to get reviewers excited about what you're planning to do. So you're using the literature, policies and calls and PPI and your own experience to define the problem up to a point. Obviously there's going to be more definition and refinement during the pre-doctoral fellowship or the pre-application support fellowship. You're justifying why you want to look at this area or what you're planning to do, or what courses you're doing. You're trying to find the evidence of the best design, to inform your main study. You're showing that the work fits into the remit of the funder, and you're providing a logical, convincing argument to the reviewer as to why you are the right person to support this. So obviously that's going to be a bit different for, a narrative CV to a research area of interest, but that kind of story and argument is going to run through both. In both, you're trying to demonstrate first, that you're worthy of support, that you've got all that it takes. Secondly, that you've got a good idea, and you're kind of going to explore how to make sure this will be really useful to the NHS or social care or public health or local authorities in the future. So it's creating that argument. And in a sense, you want reviewers to be enthused. You want them to say, well, why haven't we done this before? Why hasn't this work been done before? This is really important. So remember, use the force of argument. So a couple of worksheets for you. Firstly, to continue thinking about the one you've just had a go at. So what can you do to sort of fill that out and to create your one-pager? If you really do have a very good idea of the research design that you want to do, and some people do, they know what they want to do. Parker Darrington have something called their Pippin sentences. And he uses this to sort of suggest sort of in 10 sentences to give a project overview. So it gives reviewers an idea of an overview. And these are tremendously helpful, for example, constructing lay summaries. And you could use it also to do your research area of interest if you have a bit more information, about what it is that your ultimate project is going to be about. So it depends where you're at, really. I think probably most people, the first template is more helpful because you don't necessarily know all the specific details. But if you do have a very good idea about what you want to do, it's probably worth looking at this particular blog. So there's a sort of promise statement. So you give an overview of what it is you're trying to do. It's a bit like a title, I suppose. The importance, what makes the project important to the funder, the problems that the project will solve. And he's suggesting up to 3 that you can solve. Project summary. So, in terms of the methods, so I'm going to answer these problems by doing these methods. Implementation, so the main work packages, mapping onto the problem. Sorry, that's probably where your methods are. And then what will happen next? So the impact of the research, what are the next steps? What will the results of this work be? So that could be done if you feel you've got a better idea of the fellowship project that you want to do. And they're also tremendously helpful, to say, to help you write summaries and to provide a kind of scaffold for your case for support. So basically you can split all these sentences up and then populate much bigger areas underneath them, and you'll basically have a research proposal, but obviously you do need to adapt that to the funder's requirements. So this is obviously his idea of what an overview will look like, but or a project plan might look like, but funders will have their own sections that they want you to fill in a particular order. So you may have to adapt that. So it's just a couple of things to perhaps help you scaffold and structure your research area of interest.